Hello, I'm working on a video right now. I'm trying to crank it out for Friday, and it's on package thieves. So I wanted to talk to an expert on theft. So I talked to Dr. Robert Tyminski, who wrote a book called The Psychology of Theft and Loss. It's about the different kinds of theft as he imagines them, and also how theft is related to loss that we can experience and how we experience loss more heavily than we experience gain. And that oftentimes theft is not about need, it is about something else, and it is not simple. And that is sort of what I got at. And I'm getting at with this video. So let's talk about theft not being simple, and also package thieves and that Mark Rober video that everybody's been talking about. I sent it to him. It was the first time he'd seen it. And so we get to talk about that. So this is Dr. Robert Tyminski. He's the author of The Psychology of Theft and Loss. I started out by asking him what he thought of the video. So let's just start there.
I mean, there are a couple of things I found really interesting. One was I was trying to figure out the emotional responses of the people who were being pranked. And of course, they were all surprised. But a couple of them seemed a little angry, and I thought that was interesting. And then, of course, a couple were fearful, like what's next. There wasn't any guilt obvious. Of course, this was all very short, but there wasn't any, crap, I shouldn't have ever taken that box, or I deserve this, or anything like that. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I also found that very interesting, the feeling of indignation, as if my theft has gone wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
How have I been done wrong to during the course of my theft? You thought a lot about theft and about how we interact with it in our society. Do you think there is something particular about package theft, this sort of separated a little bit from the act?
It's not quite like pickpocketing, right? Because you're not in proximity to the person. It is a little bit like shoplifting in the sense that you could imagine the victim is the store or the victim is some corporation. So likewise for these people, they're probably they have no idea who they're stealing from. One of the categories of thieving that I've thought about and written about is when people feel entitled. And it's really coming from a very complicated place psychologically, but a piece of the entitlement is also not only are they taking it, but there's something about, there's this great word, German word, Schadenfreude. Right. I don't know if you know that word, sure. Which is a little bit pleasure at the pain of somebody else. So there's a little bit of that, snatching at Christmas time, or I don't know when this was, but snatching the present from the person, kind of spoils something for them. It's going to spoil, they're not going to have what they were expecting to get.
There was another through line in people's comments that it was just sort of, oh God, how did one person put it? That it wasn't like justice. They didn't feel like they had accomplished some kind of justice. They felt like there was strength in getting away with it. There was a rush that came from breaking that norm and being on the other side of it and having that be the thing that's sort of only they know about it.
Like a victory, a little victory or something.
Power, almost a power that they can exercise.
Yeah, and that's another category so that's interesting too. You see that with people that they can fool people and dupe them, and the rush of being able to do that. I mean, that's the kind of the Bernie Madoff character category in a way, like those people who feel like they can get away with scamming. So on a small scale, that's true. And that's also true for shoplifters, that a lot of them report it can be almost an addictive quality to it from that rush that you're talking about.
And addiction was something else that came up a lot. People who responded to me weren't necessarily people you'd think of as addicts, but people who've struggled with addiction, whether that's alcoholism or gambling, and that there is a feel-good rush to that moment. And also in particular with package theft, they reported a kind of mystery to it, that like they don't know what's going to be in the box, and so there's this excitement of opening this present almost, and it could be something completely useless to them, or it could be like gold coins.
Like what I was thinking of is a little bit like in mythology, there's Pandora's box. That gets stolen and opened and unleashes like literally plagues and pestilence and insects and So I was thinking like, oh, this is something that's been around for a long time, and that's the thing with stealing is like it's like been from since we started gathering in small groups, and so it sounds like you got a fair number of responses.
I did. I got 3 different people who sent me pretty detailed responses, and a few others who sent me like really limited stuff.
Yeah.
One of the responses I got was from somebody who had stolen a few times and like they got a little like a child's car, like a toy car, and they were playing with the toy car, and then like suddenly it all sort of hit them that they had stolen a child's Christmas present, and they like put the car back in the box, taped up the box, brought the box back, and then didn't do it anymore. It was almost sort of like because it wasn't fun anymore.
Right. That would be the guilt response and wanting to, repair it, wanting to make reparation. And that's what you would hope with stealing, but that's, I think, relatively uncommon.
This is all sort of requires like a removal of the humans you are stealing from to make it work. Because like a lot of the reports I got was people weren't thinking about the people they were taking from.
Well, there is that kind of dehumanizing, I think, with a lot of crimes, and so like a person can like blot out like, this isn't going to have any consequences on somebody that I might have to feel empathic toward or think about as being deprived from this thing that I'm stealing. It's a really funny psychological response because when you think about that, you're actually like blotting out a part of human experience by saying, I'm just doing this like it's in a vacuum and taking this thing for my pleasure. And I'm not really considering like who it was intended for and what they might need or want it for.
And there's something to the sort of like space of the porch, I feel like, where I'm not breaking into somebody's house. It's not that big of a deal. And it's almost because now this is a relatively new thing in society that we're always getting packages all the time from Amazon. Like everybody is always getting packages that this new sort of idea caught on in a lot of people. And another through line that I heard was the first time I did it, it was my friend was doing it, and then after a while of doing it with them, I started doing it on my own. A lot of like watching this sort of idea, and like the excuses for it travel through social groups.
Yeah, it's interesting about like what you're just describing about it being like a bonding experience, for the two people, and that's like the partners in crime, idea that you. And you can think about that like that's an enabling function, right? So that if you have a partner, like if you are prone to some guilt, then somehow you get to divide and not feel it quite as badly.
That actually really surprised me that there were so many people doing this as groups of people. Like it was more usual for it to be a group than to be an individual. And I would think that like you would want to hide this shame, but in fact it is a kind of bonding and also like if they're okay with it, then I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think the enabling and that's like a defense against experiencing the guilt then. It's a little bit like that bystander phenomenon that when a person sees a crime being committed, they don't do anything, or they see somebody who's in need of help and they don't do anything. And it's because if they can see other people that not doing anything, then somehow you just spread it around psychologically and you feel justified by walking away. In this case, you would feel the justification in joining the group for, doing this stuff. The porch is, so I was thinking about where do we learn how to steal? And whenever I talk with people about this, I usually like ask that question. And it's interesting to hear, the different responses. Like some people will say they learned at school, or some people will say they learned from friends. But I think most people who like really have studied this would say we learn how to steal in our families. And so the porch you could think of as being like the entrance to the family in a way. And so like, again, like, I don't know if these people were just joyriding through these neighborhoods and looking for packages, or if they actually lived in those neighborhoods. But that idea of stealing from somebody that you actually kind of know, or you might have like some knowledge of, that happens a lot. And so that the vulnerability, of course, of the porch you were mentioning, but I think like symbolically it probably also triggers something in us about like, yeah, that's the gateway into the house. That's the gateway into the family. And whatever that could mean for you or me individually will, constitute something about like, well, what didn't I get when I was young? What did I get deprived of? What Christmas got ruined for me? Those kinds of things.
It really seemed like these people were mostly people who had resources and weren't stealing out of need. Does that tell us something?
Most theft is not because people need it. There's a small category that's opportunistic based on like social and economic deprivation. And of course, that's the one that, like the police, like in the news media likes to blow out of proportion. That's actually pretty small as a percentage. And if you think about like all the theft, like I think I looked it up yesterday after I got your email, but like last year, or it might have been 2017, they always lag a year in reporting this. The like retailers lost over $50 billion to missing items, which is called shrinkage, but it's usually shoplifting. And some of that's from their own employees, too. It's just complicated.
That is what I came away from this thinking. Like, it was a really interesting, funny video, but like the change in my mind was, oh, this isn't simple. Like, I thought this was just people who were trying to buy meth, and it is not that. It is like theft is complicated.
It's very complicated, yeah.
So do you think we handle theft well in this country? Do you think that we imagine it well and can like figure out how to prevent it? Are we preventing it effectively through like criminal justice?
I think criminal justice is not the best. I mean, for certain kinds of theft, like obviously there has to be a serious legal consequence. But like in my practice where I've seen people who have, stolen, usually the criminal justice piece when it comes in just makes them feel like awful and like totally derails their lives. So there is this idea about like, can people learn from their experience? And so now like when people steal, like especially adolescents who might get caught shoplifting, you don't want to like give them a record if it's lipstick or if it's mascara or something like that, or headphones. You want to see like can they recognize that they did something wrong, and is there something restorative and reparative that can happen? And often that can be adjacent to the criminal justice system, but it's not a fundamental value in most places of that system.
The other thing I came away from this thinking is like, I personally do not understand this well. And like even now, even talking to you, even talking to the people who have done some of this, I just feel like it's super complicated. And it is, I'm also talking to the people who have done it and not the people who were exposed to the possibility of doing it and chose not to.
Right.
And though I did get some messages from those people who sort of like saw their friends doing it and talked about their friends this activity in their friends. Should we be asked to need to understand these, sort of crime in this more complicated way? Two, is there a way for us to understand, to like sort of get a better handle on why these norms, like legal norms, the ones that we can actually enforce in a court of law, but also like, those are also societal norms that it does offend me. Like, it is upsetting to think of somebody walking up to my porch with the intent to steal from me. Like, is there a better way for us to work through that and understand it more accurately? And is that useful?
In a way, like it almost sounds like a great ideal, like that could kind of happen. I mean, when I wrote my book about this, like, I came up with 5 categories, but one of the things I said about, 5 categories for stealing and theft. One of the things I said is there are more than 5 categories.
Right.
Because that I knew right away, like it's like whenever you try and do anything with human behavior, you can do like a best approximation, but you're going to leave out a lot.
Yeah.
And so I felt that was pretty relevant to what I came up with. But the one thing that did kind of show up across the different categories, which is interesting, is that often stealing has something to do with prior experiences of loss in a person's life. And so, I wouldn't ask you, like, if somebody took a package from your porch, to think about, like, that poor person because they, maybe their grandpa died last year or something like that. But it does help understand a lot of the behavior. And there's a lot of research that shows we're much more sensitive to losing things than we are to gaining and having things. And so it kind of makes some sense that like, if you have this like inbuilt, like, say it's part of our psyche, sensitivity to loss, stealing would be a really nifty workaround if you didn't want to have to face up to that.
Well, and also, I think that it outlines why maybe having something stolen from you hurts so much, whereas, like, not being able to get an item hurts way less than having the item that you already have stolen, even if you don't care that much about the item.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, when we get ripped off, there's a kind of sting to it.
Yeah.
And all kinds of feelings come up for us around that. And yet when we get a gift, we're happy and we probably like it and enjoy it. But on the Richter scale of emotions, that side moves a little bit less than the one where you get stolen from.
And I think that's why people like to see people get a little bit of a comeuppance.
Yeah, the whole pranking piece was just ingenious. I wish I had had that when I was writing my book, Seeing that would have given a whole new dimension, at least to something about, like, what you were saying, like, what can we do, like, when we're victims of theft? Because a lot, we all are. We all are victims of theft in some way.
And I think in the process of someone stealing from us, they are dehumanizing us, and so of course we dehumanize them. We imagine them as the worst thing. And watching those people hanging out in their cars, talking to their friends, I was just like, oh God, they're just they think that this is the fun thing, and they're not hardened criminals, they're not meth addicts, they're just stealing.
They're just stealing. Yeah. No, they weren't. You didn't have any, like, sense of, like, there's some gang activity or something like that going on here. They just, and some of them, I think there were a couple, they took the package home to open it.
Yeah.
And so, again, like, you just think about, like, that's this whole thing maybe with the entitlement and loss, like, oh, I want a present,
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. I think that I have a lot to work with here. Thanks for watching. Thank you to Dr. Tyminski for talking with me for a while to help me get my brain straight about some stuff, though it remains very complicated and weird. His book is called The Psychology of Theft and Loss.